All right, welcome back, everyone, to Strange Planet Podcast. And in this week's episode, we will be discussing the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which started on Saturday when thousands witnessed a massacre at the Israeli Music Festival, where Hamas fighters killed at least 260 people and took captives back into Gaza. It is also believed that Saturday's attack is the worst civilian massacre in Israeli history. And while rockets rained down, revelers said fighters converged on the festival site, while others waited near bomb shelters, gunning people down who were seeking refuge. And many of these victims, too, were also shot in the back as they were running. This is a very, very sad situation, and it seems to be getting worse. We do hope that this conflict ends as quickly as possible, and there is no more innocent bloodshed. And for now, I will pass it over to Rook, who will give you not only more information on this, but also a brief history on this as well. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and also hit that bell icon for notifications. Rook, the mic is yours.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's important to point out that, I want to explain the facts as objectively as possible. Right now, there's definitely tensions that are high on both sides, and, emotions are running high because these are very violent incidents that have caused a lot of death and injury to both Israelis and Palestinians, and we just hope this conflict can come to an end as quickly as possible. So this most recent conflict began, as you said, with the Hamas attack on a music festival in Israel. It was just a short distance from Israel's border with the Gaza Strip, and it involved Hamas fighters going in and basically gunning down concert goers at this music festival. This was part of a larger operation, a planned operation, in which they also fired hundreds of rockets into Israel and also kidnapped a lot of Israeli citizens, hundreds of Israeli citizens, and are now holding them hostage in Gaza. Some of those citizens are soldiers, some of them are civilian women and children. And it's a very tense situation because obviously, reducing the loss of life and further injury would be ideal here, but it's a very tough situation because you have Israeli forces sort of building up. Netanyahu is prepared to send a ground invasion into the Gaza Strip with 300,000 reservists that were called up. And, we just want to, let everyone know that, we're thinking of, all the innocent people involved in this conflict. And this is, the latest in a long-running history of Israel versus Palestine in terms of their conflict. So what a lot of people might not know is that this dates back not necessarily to ancient or biblical times, but is actually the source of the conflict is actually much more recent and goes back to the early 20th century. So during the early 20th century, there was an empire called the Ottoman Empire, which owned most of what's now known as the Middle East. And that included Palestine and the place where Israel currently is. And the Ottoman Empire was a pretty stable place in which there were a lot of different Arab groups and also Jewish people. And at the beginning of the 20th century, more Jewish people began to migrate to the Palestine area and Jerusalem in particular. They were sort of driven out by Europeans who were persecuting them. So when everyone thinks of Jews in Europe in the early half of the 20th century, everyone thinks of, the Nazis and the Holocaust. But the truth is that Jews were treated poorly throughout Europe. And, it was a very hostile place toward Jewish people. And so a lot of them sought refuge in what was considered, the place of their ancestors. And Jerusalem is a holy city that is shared by all three Abrahamic religions. That would be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so all three major world religions see that as a holy place. And then what happened was the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War One. And this was part of the British Empire's effort to expand its empire into the Middle East. The World War One conflict kind of got into a stalemate at one point, and they couldn't make inroads against the Germans. And so part of their strategy was to open up another front in the Middle East to kind of distract or to sort of get some headway into, making progress in the war. And so they made certain suggestions and agreements with the Palestinian people who were present in the area that was known as Palestine, which Israel now owns. So they had agreements with them, and they said, if you help us in this war effort, we will give you your own state. And they also, made those same assurances to Jewish people. And so, but after World War One, the British Empire took over that area known as Palestine. And yeah, there was no such Palestinian state established. You fast forward to World War II, and you had the Holocaust, in which millions of Jews were killed. And that was basically the impetus for, after the war, the British government decided to establish a Jewish state so that both people from Europe and Jews that were already present in the Middle East could live there. So initially, this was a pretty small territory, but because of the conflict with the Arabs there, they fought a war, and Israel took a lot of territory after winning that war. And so that territory included what is now known as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So they seized this territory, but the people who lived there were still there. And so that was kind of a problem, because here
Right.
you had a state that was established as a Jewish state, but yet you had all of these Palestinians who were Islamic living there. And this has been a source of conflict ever since, because the Palestinians were offered a state of their own in terms of, having a state called Palestine, but that never happened. The Palestinians rejected it because of the border disputes with Israel. And so the Israelis got their state, the Palestinians didn't. And now, after that war, they took the territory that the Palestinians had anyway. And so here we are all these years later, and the Palestinians still don't have a state. Now, back in 1993, when President Clinton was president, there was a big summit, and they came up with an agreement called the Oslo Accords, where by the Israel and the Palestinians agreed in principle to a two-state solution. And this involved getting Israel to and the Palestinians to recognize each other's rights to exist, and it allowed for the Palestinians to govern themselves. Before that, they weren't permitted to. They were just, a part of Israel, but not allowed to participate in civic government. So Israel also agreed to withdraw its troops from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and, not to occupy those areas. So that, especially that portion of the agreement, was never fulfilled. And so the West Bank in particular, over the last several decades, has seen Israel establish settlements in the West Bank. And so that further eliminates territory that the Palestinians have in the West Bank. So that's getting smaller and smaller as Jewish settlements are established there. And that is, in, by the way, violation of international law. The UN Security Council, which includes the US, Russia, and China, and the UK and France, you can't really find a thing that all the Security Council powers agree upon these days, but they all agreed that what Israel did in terms of taking this territory and establishing settlements was in violation of international law. However, that law wasn't enforced, and so Israel continues to move into that territory, establish settlements, and nothing is ever really done about it. You can also go to on the Gaza Strip I would say about a decade and a half ago, Israel blockaded the Gaza Strip so that no one could go in or out. So it was a very, you're basically sealing off that area. And obviously there are security reasons for doing that, but it also creates a humanitarian crisis where, you have 2 million people living in the Gaza Strip, which is an area about twice the size of Washington, D.C., which only has about 700,000 residents. So, they're cramped into this area. They don't have access to food or water or jobs or anything. And it's a very unfortunate situation because, Israel is doing very well. They're one of the tech leaders in the world. They have all this advanced technology and medicine. And yet here are Palestinians who don't have access to those things. There when these conflicts happen and people in Gaza are injured, like innocent people, they're not able to get the services that they need in terms of medical care because the facilities in Gaza aren't equipped to perform, some of the major surgeries that are needed to help people and to help them survive. And so, they have to request permission from the Israeli government, who they aren't too happy with because they were likely the source of the injuries sustained by people that are in the hospital. They have to request that they be allowed to leave the Gaza Strip to go get a health in, say, Egypt. It's a very tense situation because obviously while, committing acts of violence, especially against innocent people, that's deplorable. But it's not surprising that, after all of these years of conflict, and because the international community hasn't stepped in to say, let's put an end to this conflict once and for all, and establish a peaceful resolution because these things were ignored for so long. It's not surprising that, what happened on Saturday and what is happening now as the latest iteration of this conflict. It's not surprising that it's occurred.
That is a very detailed history there too, and it kind of really paves the way to where we are now. And wow is really all I can say to that. Like that's just I don't even know if I have words really to describe that situation there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a longer conflict than a lot of people realize, and it's very territorial in nature. It's not, there's an aspect of religion to it, but at this point, it's way beyond that.
That's what I figured too, because it sounded like a religious kind of war in a sense, but now it's surpassed that. But the thing interesting enough too is that Gaza Strip, even if you look at it on a map, for 2 million people to be in that little strip, they're boxed in. You know what I mean? Like you said, they don't have any connections to the necessities of life. So that, all this piles on top of one another. And then, like you said, it wasn't necessarily a surprise when these things happen. But I'm not saying that they're right, but at the same time, it's like the tea kettle boiling. You know what I mean? It's on the burner, and then eventually it's gonna pop. And then, unfortunately, that's where we're at now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a failure of the international community, which makes promises and assurances to execute on those. The Oslo Accords should have resolved the situation, but there was no, I guess, enforcement or there was no insistence that the criteria that the sides agreed to was met. And that's a responsibility of the international community. And when the international community says that the settlements are in violation of international law, and then nothing is done to remedy or enforce the law, then that creates a sense of unfairness, and people are angry,
Right.
and the Palestinians are angry because there seems like there's no way to peacefully resolve the situation.
So now, did you see any way, I guess, could this have been prevented?
Yeah, so I mean, in addition to what I just said about, sort of enforcing or making sure that the Oslo Accords, the items that were agreed to, were adhered to, there just seems to have been a prolonged period of nothing really happening. And when I say nothing happening, it means that there's been a long period of the status quo, which is that, the Gaza Strip has been blockaded, for the past 16 years. And, they're basically, these 2 million people are basically trapped in there in terrible conditions, and nothing was being done about it. And, it's got to be very difficult. And then all of these conflicts happen, and people on both sides are killed, and anger and hatred is, it's basically an ongoing cycle that seems to have no end. Now, I guess in terms of preventing it, the government of Palestine, or the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, is currently Hamas. And Hamas has been designated by the United States and others as a terrorist organization. And so Israel doesn't really want to negotiate or deal with them in any way. And
Right.
so there, it's basically just been a, status quo. Nothing has really changed on the ground in Gaza.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just,
remained the same. They were like bolted in there and they can't leave.
living
They
in
are
poverty. Yeah, right. And even now, like if innocent people in Gaza want to leave, they can't. They have to stay there and get bombed.
Jesus.
They can't leave through Israel, and the only area that was open for them to possibly go through in all the way to the south in Egypt, that border's closed. Egypt closed the border.
Oh
So,
wow.
they're basically trapped in there. And so, this is a very bad situation because, you know, there's a lot more to this conflict that's going to occur, and a lot more casualties are likely. And, as far as immediate security, it may help, but long term, it's going to breed a lot more hatred. Around half or almost half of the Palestinians in that area are, kids. They're minors. Somewhere around 40% are like under age 15. And
Wow.
so, these kids are growing up seeing, in poverty, they have no opportunities. And they're just seeing buildings being leveled around them. I mean,
They don't even have
as
the
a kid,
resources they need too.
right? And they can't leave, they can't go anywhere. And, all they know is that they're surrounded by this country named Israel. Now, they may have no connection to Hamas or, terrorism, but, what what choices are they being provided? Is it to just sit there and get bombed? It's very difficult to grow up in those circumstances and, not, what does that 14, 15-year-old kid do? They
Especially when he
can't
gets
leave.
older.
They see their families dying around them. There's no job opportunities, there's no food, like, and now you're having a situation where, Israel's cutting off food, water, power,
Wow.
and what do you think as a kid that's suffering through that? It's going to make it really easy for terrorist groups like Hamas to recruit them. They said, look at what's happening. Look, they killed your family. They killed, you're starving. You have no power. You can't leave. You're a prisoner, and it makes it very easy to recruit the next generation of terrorists.
Yeah. That's what it's kind
Um,
of unfolding here. That all
and
yeah.
so yes, it's vital that Israel be able to defend itself and to feel secure, but at the same time, there also has to be a permanent solution in terms of establishing peace between the Palestinians and Israelis. This, situation, the status quo cannot go on
Yeah, that's a fact there. Because you
because
figure
otherwise you're just going to have the next generation of terrorists being, groomed from, this conflict.
right. And you said like Hamas is the terrorist group, but not
Right. They've been
obviously.
they're both a terrorist group and they are the ruling government in Palestine now, or
Oh, okay.
excuse me, in the Gaza Strip now.
Right. Okay. That answered my second question then.
Um, you know, it used to be the Palestinian Authority, which was the group that produced the Oslo Accords with Israel. But, after the Oslo Accords, years went by, decades went by, and, they still didn't have their state, and Israel still, was, advancing in terms of the West Bank into settlements, and they issued this blockade that basically traps the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. You know, the people, I guess, wanted change there, and that allowed for an extremist group like Hamas to, sort of take over that government there.
I could also understand too, like Israel not wanting to negotiate with terrorists, but the difference here is that terrorist group is also the government of the entire Gaza Strip, as you said. So that's the reason why, like, it can get sticky because obviously not just you said there's 2 million people in that on that little strip too. Now I'm sure not all of them are included in that, but then how do you differentiate who is and like who isn't? So instead of dealing with that, I guess Israel was just like, we're boxing them all in there and we're not dealing with it, period, kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think of it like this. Like, look at what happened when, for 4 years, Trump was our president, right? And Trump, went around the world sort of ruining our relationship with a lot of our allies.
Right.
Now, he could have, started some wars and killed people in our name. But then, you know, let's just say, that happened. And other countries looked at Americans and said, you know, look who you chose as your leader. You are all responsible.
Right.
Now, I don't think that would be fair. Everyone's an individual. There's some
Right.
people, many people, actually, the majority of voters did not support Trump. And yet he went around the world doing things in our name that we didn't agree with. And, we don't want to be judged by the actions of our government, when it's run by a lunatic like that. And, I'm sure there's plenty of, peace loving people in the Gaza Strip that, just want to live their life in peace and freedom.
Right. Freedom.
And, you know, it's
And they're being penalized for their terrorist
they
government.
yeah, right. And they aren't able to do that any more than we are able to do anything about Trump when he was in power.
Right. There's nothing we could
Now
have
that he's
done.
out of power, our legal system is, you know, getting into action. But while he was in power, there was nothing we could do about him.
Right. And see, the fear here too now is just like you were saying before, the manipulation of the whole situation to possibly some of those people that wanted nothing to do with it. Because all they got to say is like, look what they're doing to us. Join us. They killed your, like
Right.
you said, they killed your family. They're starving us. They're cutting our medical supplies and stuff off. They won't let us leave. So like that's going to be incentive to try to flip some minds and start recruiting. And that could be
Right. No,
very,
I
very
mean,
dangerous.
you look at a situation where, like, Israel sends an airstrike into Gaza. The people in Gaza can't leave. It injures some people. Someone, say a mother has sustains injuries and needs to have surgery to survive. Now you have to go to the country that just did those airstrikes and ask them for permission, special permission to leave, to have your mother go to a hospital that can actually perform the surgery. And maybe they'll get back to you and approve it. Maybe they'll deny it. Maybe it'll be too late. And how would you feel if that happened? You'd be pretty angry
Yeah.
that you weren't allowed the freedom to leave and to get the best medical care you could for your mother. And so, it's very easy to see how, you know, that would be a way for terrorists to recruit people who have suffered. And, there's already the economic suffering and starvation. Now you add, death and injury, and it makes it very easy for a terrorist group to go in there and say, hey, look, this has been happening, far too long. Nothing is happening. This is the only way. Violence is the only way. Join us. Let's fight back. Like it makes the recruitment, far too easy. And so I think in resolving this conflict, we have to have a, permanent solution, and the international community has to be involved in this. This has been allowed to go on for far too long, and Israel and the Palestinians they're very obviously they're very close to the issue. They're suffering losses, and I think that the international community needs to come in and say, look, this has to stop. We're gonna put a stop to this. We're gonna have humanitarian groups go in, and we're going to make sure that civil society in Palestine is governed by people that are not going to commit terrorism, but also, put them on a path to self-governance.
Right.
And we're also going to make sure that Israel is secure from these type of attacks that we saw last Saturday. And I think if the international community is focused and committed, it can be done. But it's going to be very hard to dial down the rhetoric, dial down the anger and frustration, because the things that just happened, they're still very fresh on the minds of both Israelis and Palestinians. And so I think, it's gonna take some real time and effort from not only these two countries, but other countries that are interested in brokering peace. It's going to take a lot of effort, but it has to be done. This is the last time that this should happen.
I agree. This definitely needs to end, and it definitely needs to be the last time. And that's our show for this week. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon for notifications. Strange Planet will have new episodes on YouTube every Friday. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.